Director Hamilton,
Here.
Director Mediator Ramos,
Here.
Director Mays,
She's excused.
Director Olson,
Here.
and Director Wilson.
Are we in compliance with the open meetings law?
Yes, Madam Chair, we are in compliance.
All right. We do have one person here who has signed in for public comments. And so Dr. Lisa Conley, and while she's getting seated, I'd like to read from our board policy that no person may speak more than once to an issue for a period longer than 5 minutes. No more than 3 people may be heard on one side of an issue, except upon consent of the majority of the board. We will be timing for the 5 minutes, and a sign will be held up at 1 minute. So welcome.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, Chairperson Olson, members of the MATC board, Dr. Martin, and others here today or remotely, as the case may be. For those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Lisa Conley, an MATC Biological Sciences faculty member and president of AOT Local 212, the union representing MATC's full and part-time faculty, paraprofessionals, and MPBS engineers and production staff. On behalf of Local 212, I bring greetings and the very good news that those we represent once again overwhelmingly voted to recertify our 4 bargaining units, doing so at levels of turnout and affirmation for representation that were the highest among our peers in the state. To those that we represent, I want to take this public opportunity to thank you for your trust, confidence, and continued support. To Dr. Martin and members of the administration, we look forward to continuing our work together and doing so in a truly collaborative fashion, one where the voices of frontline professionals are at the table early and often. In doing so, we will ensure that MATC can deliver the high quality educational experience that our students need and deserve, and upon which our community depends. MATC's ability to do this lies heavily on the strength of its workforce and its ability to attract and retain, as we so often hear in meetings, the best and the brightest. As suggested in Local 212's compensation resolution shared a month ago, a slipping competitiveness of pay and MATC's pay structure itself are likely having a negative impact on our ability to do just that. I am happy to report that frontline and administrative representatives have begun meeting to discuss pay-related concerns. 2 additional events later this week are also of note. Dr. Martin and I are meeting to discuss the compensation resolution in more detail on Thursday, I believe. And Local 212 will seek at the least a real raise for those we represent when bargaining commences on Friday. Sadly, however, this month's HR report once again demonstrates continued attrition of key, highly skilled, and dedicated employees from both frontline and administrative ranks. We believe that the level and frequency of resignations of late are too great to be easily explained away by the pandemic spurred, as they call it, Great Resignation. While planned retirement or better pay have surely been factors, those who have spoken directly to or read the resignation letters of those leaving can clearly see that poor working conditions, including negative interpersonal interactions and other climate-related factors, are far too often mentioned. While the college has begun the very, very hard work and continues its journey to address these issues, and while we at Local 212 pledge to be an active partner in this important work, much still remains to be done. That's why we hope that the board will see as one of its roles assisting when appropriate and ensuring forward movement on addressing these issues. MATC's employees and therefore our students are depending upon it. In closing, thank you so very much for your time and attention. And of course, to the board members here, thank you for all that you do for MATC. You are truly appreciated.
Thank you. We will move on to the approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion for approval on the minutes from the regular board meeting of March 22nd, 2022?
I move approval.
Your second?
I'll second.
Anything worth noting on there that anyone to correct? Okay, if not, there's been a motion by Director Foley and a second by Director Baker to approve the minutes of March 22nd, 2022. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we move on to the approval of the consent agenda items. There are 4 items listed under there. Just to be noted, there is not a procurement report since there was nothing that was on there that of that amount that needed to have that included on here. So could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda items?
I move to approve the consent agenda items.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second.
Yeah, 3 seconds. I'll take Director Mendito Ramos for that. So anybody have any questions on any of the items under consent agenda? Director Baker.
Yeah, so the human resource report, as I was looking through it, I was, you know, I'm trying to think of the right word. I was pretty concerned because I saw that we have the resignation of our Dean of Community and Human Services, the pathway that we had a presentation on last month. That's the 3rd dean in as many months. We had 7 deans. This is like, this is very concerning. And I know I had made a request to the administration back in January that there had been a letter, a dean's letter. And I'd like us to get a chance to take a look at that. And I believe Dr. Martin at the time said that I think that Dr. Mannion's department was going to be looking at that and that there was a response that was written. And I would like to see those brought to the board so the board gets a chance to look at those items. And that the administration could report to us on that next month. I think there's more here than the Great Resignation, which best economists are really calling the Great Reshuffling. You know, and if we have people who are leaving here and going to other colleges, I want this to be the place everybody wants to be. That's okay, the mask and the vacuum, okay, whatever. But I want, this was always the place everybody wanted to work. I want to make sure that we are doing everything that it still is that. And so I think it's important for us as a board to see what's happening, particularly with this pathways issue. Because 3 out of our 7 deans is a very concerning number. Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay. We had a motion by Director Foley and second by Director Mendito Ramos to approve the consent agenda items. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Now we move on to our board action.
Chair, are we moving quite quickly tonight? I apologize. This thing can't catch up quite quickly enough. Miss Director Baker raised an issue. Does that mean we moving on? Do it mean we can't talk about it? What do it mean?
Director Wilson, I had asked if anybody else would like to speak on that, and I didn't hear anybody. I paused.
You know what? My question is not would anybody else like to speak. My question is, are we moving on? Are we saying, oh, well, I mean, what are we saying? I just need to know. I'm not trying to speak on anything other than what are we doing?
Director Baker is she has her hand up.
Director Wilson, you're not in the room. As I made the request, I saw both the chair and the president nodding
Yes.
and taking notes on it. And so I'm going to be looking for it on our agenda next time. If for some reason I don't see it on our agenda, I'll wave a flag on that and make sure that it is.
Okay, like I said, my computer's behind. I apologize. I can't be there. I'm trying to do the best I can with this computer.
Sure. Yeah, so there was a recognition of that and looking at and deciding how that comes back board agenda or in between stuff or however that looks like. So there was a recognition of that item for sure. So. Director Wilson, did you vote on the item for that, or I guess?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we are moving on to item 5, which is the board action items. The resolution F0224-04-22 that authorizes the sale of $1.5 million general obligation promissory notes, series 2021-2022K, the Milwaukee Area Technical College District of Wisconsin. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll move approval.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. And Mr. Meehan, I believe, is via Zoom. Beth,
I
is
am,
that it?
thank you.
There you are. All right. Would you like to share with us?
I will. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'll just walk through the sale. It's very similar to what we've had in past actions. Based on the board's initial resolution, we went to market today for the 1.5 million series 21-22K. We had 3 bidders, some familiar names. And once again, Fidelity Capital Markets, who has won your issues in the past, came in at a 2.58%. You'll recognize that these interest rates are higher. They're higher than the last sale and the sale before that. What I recognize is that the cover bids, Colliers, the difference between the winner and the cover is 20 basis points or 0.20, which is a significant difference. And that FHN came in third by an 0.02, which is more common from the bids we see. The point I'm making only is Fidelity had somewhere to go with the bonds, and therefore they were able to be very aggressive and bid through the market. Well, I should say through the market, but bid what was their market at a 258. So that's we're happy to see their participation. Next page, please. As far as the note structure, very similar to other issues. The date settlement will be on May 12th. The funds will be transferred to MATC. Maturities are June 1, 2023 to 26. We do have a first interest payment this December, and there are funds on hand and available to make that payment. Because of their amortization, they're non-callable. The AA1 is confirmed in the back of the handout. We have a copy of the press release. My only comment on the rating is no comment. There's the language is exactly the same as the previous sale. So, it's the same language as they wait for new information. And once again, the true interest rate is the 258 to Fidelity Capital. Next page, please. As far as the overall financing plan, we have one more sale this fiscal year. And that's the Series L. I have trouble keeping all my letters straight, but the Series L issue, which will sell in May. And we're on structure, we're on track. As I mentioned, the rates on, if you look at the Series K, the coupons came at about a 4.25 or so, which is the highest we've seen over the past 11 sales. I'm not concerned, not uncomfortable, because our structure is allowed and taking into consideration this possibility. And we'll work with Jeff and his team looking at the financing plan for 22-23 and going forward. And at the very back of the report, with a handout is the copy of the credit report itself. The material I just covered has been put into the resolution, which is prepared by your bond counsel, Michael Best, and I'll be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you. Any questions? Sort of depressing, but there's not much else to say, but it's the market.
Right.
Yeah.
As long as there's no, as long as there's no change in what Rudy says. Maybe.
Well, let me just add this. When my wife and I bought our first house, the interest rate was 12.5%. So we should be very grateful that we are paying only 2.58.
My youngster was 18%.
Agreed.
Okay, I don't see any other questions here, so I think that we are ready to take a roll call vote, Gwen.
Aye.
Director Diaz.
Aye.
Director Foley.
Aye.
Director Hamilton.
That was so.
Aye.
It was.
Director Mendieta Ramos.
Aye.
Director Wilson.
Aye.
Director Baker.
Aye.
And Director Olson.
Aye. Next, we have the resolution of F0225-04-22, which authorizes the issuance of 1.5 million general obligation promissory notes series 2021-2022L, which was just mentioned, of the Milwaukee Area Technical College District of Wisconsin. Do I have a motion to approve that resolution?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Now, we have a motion by Director Mendieta Ramos and a second by Director Foley to approve resolution F0225-04-22. Gwen, could you please take a roll call vote?
Director Diaz.
Aye.
Director Foley.
Aye.
Director Hamilton. Director Hamilton. Director Mendieta Ramos.
Aye.
Director Wilson.
Aye.
Director Baker.
Aye.
Director Case.
Aye.
Director Olson.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Meehan.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Madam Chair, shall I call Director Hamilton again?
You can, yes, see if he's,
Director Hamilton.
see if he's on Zoom or just. Okay, we will move on to item C, which is approval of other student fees, avocation fees, and adult tuition. Do I have a motion?
I'll move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Dr. Diaz. And Ava, if there are any questions or if you'd like to
Sure.
present information.
Well, I'd just like to introduce myself to those of you who may not know me. I'm Eva Keither, and I'm the controller in the business office at MATC.
Excuse me. I can't hear anything she said.
Yeah, we'll have her come up to the table. Thank you, Director Wilson.
All right, let me start over. My name is Eva Keither, and I work as a controller at MATC, and I'm stepping in for Jeff Hollow, who's on vacation. So just some very brief comments about the fees that you see in your attachment 5C. The fee summary shows actual student tuition and fees over the past 2 years. The column, which is second furthest from the right, shows proposed fees for our upcoming 23 budget. And it's important to note that the fees highlighted in gray are determined by the WTCS board, so MATC has no discretion over these fees. Of the small handful of WTCS fee changes, the most impactful to our budget is our post-secondary tuition rate increase, which is 1.74% for fiscal 23. The unhighlighted fees are established by MATC administration, and of the fees that MATC has discretion over, there is only one change proposed for fiscal 23, which is the student parking fees, which have been brought back up to pre-pandemic levels during fiscal 22, sorry, I'm getting my fiscal years mixed up. The fees were reduced as a COVID relief measure for students. And that's pretty much it. Not too many changes. Is there any questions?
Sure, Director Baker.
Yeah, just I noticed the parking. Is that something that our student government looks at? I mean, do we get feedback from our students on whether how impactful this is?
We do. That is a portion of the student life budget. So they are presented the budget and they do approve the budgets. So yes.
And so people felt this was not prohibitive for our students.
I feel that everybody, there is consultation from both student services and student life staff and administration. So they had come together and proposed the fee.
Okay. If there's no other questions, we will take a voice vote. I believe, wait, Director Baker, did you make the motion?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought you did, like all of a sudden it was, so we had a motion by Director Baker and a second by Director Diaz that I had to approve the other student fees, avocation fees, and adult tuition. So all those in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. Next, we have approval of the facilities multi-year plan. And that was submitted, and we had a work session, if you remember, this fall on some of that by Janice. And so I would take a motion to approve the facilities multi-year plan recommendations.
I move to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Director Wilson. Any questions or discussions on this item?
I have a question. Maybe it's in here, but let me just ask the question this way. We're talking about spending $400 million over 10 years for what is a substantial part of which is new space. What level of enrollment does this plan assume in FTE equivalents, if that's easiest? And is there a connection between where we are spending the money and what we think will happen to enrollments? Now, I know there's a touchy-feely aspect to this, that, oh, we have, you know, nicer places for students to congregate and collaborate, and we think that will help. I don't think that's probably a verifiable number. But we are talking about spending substantial money on not one, but two health sciences facilities, changes for public television. I've forgotten what the others are. So can you walk us through that part of the analysis, please?
Sure. So you're going to need to come up, and I would invite Mary Barton, who's from Strang Architects, who our Director of Facilities Planning and Construction, so I can come up and try to answer that question. So we engaged Ruffalo Noel Levitz to get data on enrollment projections, as well as the growing industries in terms of job demand. So we looked at all of that data. We worked with each of the pathways as well in their development of their academic multi-year plan, which you all approved, I believe, reviewed and approved at a previous meeting. So all of this is in alignment with the enrollment data that we saw that is coming in the years to come, as well as the growth projections in the various programs. So what you see evidenced in the plan and the recommendations are to expand, decommission some outdated space, first of all. So we're eliminating some square footage, but then also looking to construct facilities that are state of the art and growing in those particular areas. So I'll let Ginny or Larry chime in on any of that if there's additional information that they think is relevant to share.
Yeah, I think part of the recommendations here are understanding the projections that we received through the enrollment. And those projections did forecast, if you had a do-nothing strategy, that there could potentially be a decline in enrollment. So we are trying to reverse that potential by upgrading the quality of your facilities through these various projects that are being defined here. And some of those are new buildings, and especially the new buildings are very much aligned with the academic enrollment projections in those particular programs as being high student demand, high employer demand. And you know, those combinations would suggest that the investment would be most wise in those particular buildings that are identified there.
Can I ask just one follow-up question? I've raised this before as we talked about this. There's an option in here to divest the West Dallas campus. Where are we in our analysis of whether we're going to want or need to expand that campus over the next 10 years?
So we have a lot of community engagement we need to do with that community to understand the best way to go about that and in what way we go about that. So that is an option that's outlined in the plan. Whether we ultimately go there or not, it will really depend on the types of programs we have centralized there now, being welding. We have our funeral services program that's in a leased building near the West Dallas campus, and we're looking at outside partnerships where we could perhaps share space at some of the other, the Freighter and some maybe the medical college or other places that would be a better fit for that program to actually go into. So there's a lot of collaboration and development that needs to go into those plans as to whether or not that will actually happen. But we also want to continue to have a presence in West Dallas. So what that will look like for the future, all is subject to further conversation and development.
What's the timeline for that?
It's a 10-year plan, so.
Yeah, but you can't wait 6
It's-
years to decide.
Yeah, so I think, once we get this plan approved and the recommendations approved here, then we can launch it to the community. We can hold some community engagement sessions to understand what the community wants in West Dallas and how we can create better synergy between our downtown campus and West Dallas. We're in pretty close proximity. And then what types of offerings should still be maintained within the West Dallas community. And we've also been engaged in conversations with the West Dallas, West Milwaukee High School, the school district. Unfortunately, their referendum was not successful just recently. We had hoped that we could have created some synergy there, but we will continue to look at partnerships at that school district as well to how we can reach in and engage the high school students as well as potentially do some training in those facilities as well. Director Baker.
And to be clear, this is a visionary 10-year plan. You come back to us with 3-year plans and yearly updates that we approve as a board when we get to some of these specifics.
Correct. And tonight you'll see our visioning for the next year, and it's always subject to change. So we're using these recommendations already in our visioning for next year's projects, and we will continue to do that. Ginny's team does a great job going out and collecting all of the projects, and then we have a prioritization process, and then we align it with what these plan recommendations are telling us in terms of changes and reductions and expansions. Any other questions that we can answer? So I'd like to recognize the team that worked on this. This was a long project. And there are many other people here that aren't here, but I'd like to recognize Jenny Rothy's contributions, and String Architects did a great job for us. So the full plan is 500 pages plus. So if you'd like to see the full plan, we have that. We just really tried to carve out some of the pertinent pieces for you tonight. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So we did have a motion by Director Foley and a second by Director Wilson to approve the facilities multi-year plan recommendation. So this will be a voice vote. All those in favor of approval, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carries. Next, we have resolution F0226-04-22 to approve the contract for the master control services between the state of Wisconsin Educational Communications Board and Milwaukee Area Technical College District. Can I have a motion to approve, please?
I move to approve.
I'll second.
Thank you. Mr. Zachary. We had heard some of this last meeting. We got some details on the dilemma and the situation that was there. So any follow-up or any questions before we vote on it? So. Made you move for nothing, maybe. Any other questions for anybody who might be online? We got a pretty detailed report last time in the scenarios that were presented to us and the options. So this isn't the first time that we've heard this or revisited this topic. This is taking action tonight. Okay, I'm not hearing or seeing any. So that being said, I had a motion by Director Foley and a second by Director Baker to approve the resolution F0226-04-22. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
And our last action item is the approval of the board self-evaluation instrument. Do I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Give a second.
Second.
Thank you. As a reminder of this, we took a look at this tool. We held a retreat and Dr. Mannion shared with us where the Higher Learning Commission and the role of that and why we do that. It isn't just to fill some time and then do nothing with the results. And so our goal is to be able to do that. And so where we are with this process and knowing what we might be revisiting this summer to do maybe even a bigger overhaul on the tool. So this is sort of a temporary to get us through that, knowing that we will be doing a deeper dive into the instrument this summer after some of that work to make sure that it really aligns with our work, because obviously the goal is to be able to use the results on where are some areas and then hold ourselves accountable to that and use our goals that we as a board set, not the college's goals from this instrument. So I think that was at least a revisit of the tool and its existence over time. And so we did talk about that at our recent retreat. So we decided at this time, based on the time, not to do that major overhaul. So we do need to approve it before we actually implement and take the instrument in a short amount of time here. So any questions or discussions on this item? Okay, not seeing or hearing any. So we had a motion by Director Foley and a second by Director Diaz to approve the board self-evaluation instrument as in your board packet. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstain. I abstain.
Thank you. We have that. Do you have that, Glenn? Director Wilson abstain. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have our policy approvals here. So I'm going to ask Kristen Ducato to come up. And I am going to take these individually because I know that there have been some modifications to this rather than as an entire group. I think that'll simplify things and we can move through some of them rather than wondering which one we're on, because remember, we pulled these out of previous ones as Kristen shared with us last month. And so I think it'll be easier to take it that way. So I will take a motion for item 6A, which is the policy on consensual relationships. Okay, Director Mendieta Ramos. Do I have a second?
Actually, was
Just-
Baker's.
just-
Oh, I'm sorry. I was like, I couldn't. I was like looking down and I was like, okay, there you go. Sorry. Okay, I was looking down and I thought I knew it. I guess it's no, maybe it was the mask that gave it a little bit of, yeah. So, okay. So questions, discussion on item 6A, policy, the consensual relations policy specifically.
So has this changed from when we saw it last
Yeah.
month?
Yes.
Can you just highlight that for us?
Sure, sure. So thank you very much, and for bringing that up, Director Baker. Last month, we had some comments brought up about the consensual relationships policy. So what we did was we clarified the fact that it applies not only in situations where there is a subordinate relationship between the two consensual partners, but where there is a sphere of influence. And obviously the goal is to remove any kind of power imbalance between the two partners. So it will apply in those circumstances.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that specific policy? Thank you for making that adjustment based on our conversation. So we did have a motion by Director Baker and a second by Director Mendieta Ramos to approve policy under item 6A, the consensual relationships policy. All those in favor of approving that policy signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. I will then take a motion for item 6B, which is the sexual violence and sexual harassment policy.
Move approval.
Okay, thank you, Director Wilson, and a second by Director Baker. Discussions, questions, anything you'd like to share from differences? Maybe I'll start with you, Kristen, to share differences from last time and then highlight that.
Sure, there are currently no differences from the last proposed policy, although I understand there was one proposed modification to some sentence structure, and certainly the administration has no objection if one of the board directors, Director Foley, would like to make a motion. We're happy to make that change.
Yes, I'd like to move to amend the first paragraph to eliminate what I see as some inconsistencies. It amounts to striking the first sentence and taking some of its content and adding it to the end of the second sentence, so that it would now read, the purpose of this policy is to reflect the district board's strong commitment to promoting an environment that is free from sexual violence and sexual harassment, including but not limited to sexual assault, stalking, dating violence, domestic violence, and sexual exploitation. I don't think that changes the intent of the language, but I think it avoids some arguments later on about what it means.
I'm happy to second the amendment.
Okay. Any discussion on the amendment? Little elementary procedure
Does
to-
Director Wilson have to accept it as friendly since she made the original motion?
If you want to vote on the amendment, or are you going to say the friendly amendment and vote it all together with
I
the
think
motion? I could do it either way.
Yeah, the maker of the motion just accepts it as friendly.
Yeah, Director Wilson, were you able to hear the amendment from Director Foley?
Okay, you can vote on it.
Okay. We will vote on the amendment separately, and then we will vote on the motion afterwards. So
I have this written out if people would like to have the language in front of them.
Director Foley made the motion and Director Baker made the second to the amendment. So we have to vote on the amendment first.
Do you want me to distribute the written copy of this language, or did everybody get it to their
Whatever. No,
satisfaction?
I happen to see a preview, so I'm
Yeah.
good with it, but I think were people comfortable with the reorganization? Okay. That being said, I will take a voice vote on the amendment to that first paragraph as read. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, so that was the amendment to the motion. So the amendment passed, and we had any other, I should ask if there's any other discussion. Director Foley.
I have a question. The question relates to the inclusion of domestic violence in the list of things that are identified as including but not limited to these kinds of activities. And I don't understand why domestic violence that does not fall into one of the other categories already would be something that the college needs to address or should be addressing, because it could be, you know, an employee's spouse or who has nothing to do with the college. So I just like clarification about why that's included.
Sure. So typically the situation where this arises is where we have a student or perhaps an employee who's making a complaint, because domestic violence is prohibited conduct under Title IX. And so if you have a complainant making a complaint that a respondent, typically another student or another employee, is engaging in activity that's covered under the same jurisdictional requirement, so either on campus or in an educational program, then that is something that the complainant can make a Title IX complaint to the institution about. So for example,
Yeah, give me an example.
student A is obviously a student, and domestic violence is defined as the panoply of violence. It includes cohabitation. So it's kind of dating violence plus cohabitation, or if the two students perhaps have a child together. So if a student is a victim of domestic violence, and perhaps one of the acts of violence happens on campus, and they are in an intimate or formerly were in an intimate relationship and have cohabitated or do have a child together, then student A, the complainant, can file a Title IX complaint against student B, the respondent, and then the college would address it under the Title IX policy and may take action against student B, the respondent.
So would it only apply if both of the complainant and the respondent had a connection to the college?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine with me. Thanks.
I have no more legal questions. I can tell you that. Anybody else? If not, we will take a vote. We did have a motion by Director Wilson and a second by Director Baker, which has the amendment included in it. So all those in favor of the amended motion of the approval of the sexual violence and sexual harassment policy signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll move on to the last policy approval under this section, which is the equal opportunity harassment and non-discrimination policy. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Director Case. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you, Director Diaz. Kristen, any changes from last time we saw this?
No changes.
Okay. Anybody have any comments or questions or clarifications on this policy? Okay, seeing none, there's been a motion by Director Case and a second by Director Diaz to approve the updated policy on equal opportunity harassment and non-discrimination. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen, for your work on that. And Mark, we're ready to move on to reports, I believe. We're done with our action items tonight. So first one is the chairperson's report. So quite a few events this week here. Tomorrow, MATC will be holding the apprenticeship graduation ceremony here at 6 o'clock in Cooley Auditorium. So board members are welcome to attend. I think Director Case and Directors Mendieta Ramos have confirmed their attendance here. So right across the hallway for that. So reminder this week, at the end of this week, the Wisconsin Technical College District Boards Association, a long acronym that we continue to see this week, will hold their spring meeting in Milwaukee. So Friday night's dinner is held at the Milwaukee Doubletree by Hilton at 6 o'clock, and the in-service on Friday morning starts at 8:45 in conference room M605, and our own Dr. Christine Mannion's presentation on accreditation will kick us off. And so since we are hosting that, if we can have a strong presence, I know I have to get one of my reservations yet. I know that both Director Foley and Director Case have indicated interest in that. So if anybody else still is able to attend part of that, I think, please make sure Gwen gets that today. She did send out a reminder today that if you can't do parts of it, can we confirm? So parts of that can be our virtual for parts of that. I think we were waiting to hear if you do sign up for the morning part of it, or did I read that correctly?
The morning part can be virtual.
It can be virtual. So if you're like, I can be in my office and do that and then come in for other parts of it, lunch or dinner, whatever, that's correct. Okay, so.
I think I saw the lunch presentation virtual too. I thought they sent me a link.
They usually are.
I
Yeah.
can't hear, but I know she's attending, Director Baker is attending virtually.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, good. So if anybody else hasn't yet, just I wanted to point out that you can do the combination if that just doesn't work with your work life, but you can do some of it that way and want to attend the dinner at a different time or whatever. Please let Gwen know so we can get that done as we welcome our other district boards association here. As we were shared with, MATC is moving its spring commencement ceremony back, I say back because we called it once there before, to Fiserv Forum, and it will be on a Sunday rather than a Friday just because of dates. Sunday, May 22nd at 11 a.m. So that's a different date, location, and time. So if you previously had that in your calendar, make sure you have the new date and time and confirm your attendance for that, because I believe the next time we meet will be after this. I think our board meeting is on the 24th, so we will not meet again before the graduation. So this is your last in-person reminder if you plan on attending that. So please let Gwen know that. And the MATC District Board Appointment Committee has appointed 3 individuals to the MATC District Board. They do have to get approved at the state level by the state board, and so Tequila Burris is under the additional member classification. Supreme War Omokande is the elected official classification, and our director, Mendieta Ramos, will be reappointed as an employer with 15 plus employees under that classification. So congratulations to all of them, and look forward to seeing them at our first meeting this summer. And that is all I have for the chairperson's report. So next is our president's report. Yes.
So the chairperson sent a couple of letters out
Yes.
last week.
Yes.
And so I want to take this opportunity just to comment,
Sure.
because I would like in the future, I believe that the conversation around culture and climate at the college is an important one for us as a board to be participants in. And you and I had some conversation about this. And while I appreciate the need for us to separate out issues of complaints that that often the board may be getting communications on, which may be an inappropriate use of communication with the board. I do believe that overall culture and climate is something that is incredibly important for the board to be a part of and to engage in more than a fashion of us just hearing reports about. And as such, so I was disappointed that the board did not have a chance to discuss as a board our response to a communication from the AAN. I think it would have been appropriate for us to have that conversation. Now, we may have all then agreed with the tone and content of a letter that went out, but it would have been a conversation that we as a board had because we do have an overall responsibility for culture and climate. So I was disappointed that the letter went out without us having the ability to have that conversation. And so that could be, you know, a note for the future for us in this regard, or at least this is how I feel about this issue. Because I would like us to be participants in the conversation. And if there are meetings that are going to be happening between within the college and there are facilitators who are doing those sessions, I would be very interested in seeing perhaps a board retreat that the same facilitator could do that would inform us more as a board and engage us more directly than just getting a report on what's happening inside the college. Now, that's just a suggestion. That's just an idea. I do not think, and I am not advocating for the board to in any way engage in the complaint process or for us to be hearing individual complaints. But when our college community is coming to us and saying, you know, fairly saying in loud voices that we feel that there are some problems, then I think it's, I would like to see us as a board being able to engage appropriately in conversations about race and about culture and about like college functioning. Now, again, whether we did that in a retreat form or whether we did that in, you know, some sorts of conversations with a facilitator, something that we're not directly engaged in the conversation with staff, because not only is it inappropriate in terms of the complaint process, we'd also probably have a chilling sort of effect on the authenticity of those conversations. So I guess I apologize if I'm wandering a bit, but I think it's on the one hand, I'd like to have things like that be a board decision that the board actually has a conversation about before a letter goes out. And two, I just want to make it clear that in my opinion, I think that there is a role for the board to play in a process of having conversations about race and culture and climate in the college.
I appreciate that. I guess maybe I'm a little unclear because I believe my letter was that we do want that facilitator to work with the board. So what you're asking was what I put in the letter?
Well, what I read was that we would get reports from that facilitator or from, I didn't, and you know, I have the letter, so I'll take a look. I did not see that there was anything more than that.
The intent, my intent in the response was that we would use the facilitator to use a retreat and directly talk with us. So exactly what you're asking was the intent of the letter. Yeah, and I just wanted to make sure it clear that we would not be involved with
Right.
whoever the facilitator was selected. We wanted to make sure it was that person. So if that wasn't clear to you, that was the intent of the letter, that we would want that facilitator to work with us in a workshop or coming in and engaging with us. So
yeah, it just says we will be involved in the process by monitoring the progress through periodic updates from the facilitator about progress on the overall process without any specific individual information being shared, as well as providing the facilitator feedback and necessary. That's the only.
Yeah, and I guess
the board
could have been elaborated, but the intent of that was to work with, have that facilitator, I guess, talk. And so point taken. I guess one of the points on, if the board collectively talks, that's an open session from an open meetings law. So we would have to facilitate that and work through a response. So I guess that piece of it, I'm fine with it. I guess I'd like to hear from others on drafting responses to such. I guess I'm open to how approached that. That was the first time I mean, in this role that a response came, and I guess, talking through that as we had talked, that was the intent of that, is that not to be involved with a facilitator as they work with internal employees, because that's the relationships that need to be built. But would definitely want to hear from that same facilitator to us, so we're hearing directly what's happening with the same person, not just a general topic about diversity or whatever. We want to hear directly from that and the work that's being done, and be able to ask questions from the same person who's doing that work with the employees. So
I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that we can discuss that even in an open meeting because of confidentiality.
that's why I think we did not.
Right.
Yeah,
So
Because
and
we can't meet and talk about it without being a public meeting.
So I want to be careful not to conflate two things. So there's one thing that are these cases that people send us emails about, and that we will hear in closed session if it's necessary for the board to hear. And that may in fact even come before in front of us as an adjudicating kind of body at some point. The other thing is a broader conversation about communications, about relationships. It's Dr. Martin and I had a conversation about this, and I'm very excited by the approach that she's taking, working with a facilitator to do restorative conversations where you're like repairing relationships. And to have a conversation about that, to have a conversation as a board about there are issues of culture and climate. People are coming to us with that, kind of even the conversation we're having right now. We can't talk about specific issues and specific complaints, but we want to talk about this issue of culture and how do our students feel and how do our employees feel about the learning and the work environment here, and what can we do to make sure we're being fully inclusive. And that's a total open session conversation. The other one is not, and it's hard sometimes to separate them. But I think actually Dr. Martin's team is doing a really good job going after the issue of culture and climate, and working with trying to work with a facilitator, trying to not target a facilitator who they can work with on this. So I believe that is a very open session conversation, culture and climate.
Yeah, I guess, I also heard you say that we would collectively draft a response to a letter, and that's the part.
No, that was not, no, after, yeah.
That's what, so.
We have a conversation and then the board chair represents the board. And even if I might disagree, the majority votes, the board chair takes that message and drafts it. I mean, that's a process I'm used to from years gone by.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, I guess there's a fine line, because I'm not against discussing the culture. I think it's very important, as we've had conversations in the past.
Yeah.
But it's a very fine line, because when you're discussing the culture, names could come up and it's very sensitive. But I mean, we definitely have a problem in our hands that we have to address, and I believe we're working on it. But it's a very fine line.
Facilitators, the group that we met with.
No, this is a different situation. That was leadership, right? So there's like 4 different issues we're talking about here, right?
Okay, so I'm getting everything confused.
Sorry.
This is specific to the AAN.
Right.
And the request that there's a facilitator to work internally with employees and relationships with that piece of it. And so the response was that facilitator that's working there, the board should not be involved in the direct work that is happening among employees. And that the facilitator come to the board and share with us the work that's being done, because we don't want names, we don't want situations, we don't want incidents, but we want to be apprised of the work that's being done directly from the facilitator rather than coming from administration. That was what the response of the letter was, is that we want to hear directly from that facilitator. So that was what my response was, that we want to hear that. And as work progresses, we as a board can decide more or less, what are we getting? We want to hear, is it effective? And again, hearing from the facilitator rather than through administration or other employee groups seems to be the best approach from a bias as far as delivering it directly. And that's why we said we don't want some generic
DEI work, we want directly with the person that's working internally on our culture. So that was what the response was supposed to be and what the board then wants it to look like, because we're still in the initial stages of it, whether it's at a board meeting or whether it's a direct retreat was yet to be determined because we're still finalizing. I mean, we've not even started that work. So,
And
yeah.
while I appreciate that conversation, that's not in the letter that our employees see. And so my sense is, like, if I am just reading this letter, not as a board member, what I see is, oh, the board is just going to get reports. Because that is all the letter says, the board will get reports from the facilitator, but the board will get reports. And we get a lot of reports. And I don't think getting a report is the same kind of engagement. I think if what you just said was added to it, and again, I think we could have talked about this as a board, but if that comment, and then the board will look at how to further engage. I think that our college community wants to know the board's engaged in this, and that we're not arm's length. And the tone I got was we're keeping arm's length, and we're going to hear reports. And I think if we had just followed up with a little more, that the board is going to be compassionately engaged, I would have felt more comfortable. But again, there's two issues here. One, I would have loved to have this conversation before the board was presented to the AAN. But in hindsight, and I think moving forward, I think we have to look at how our college community sees us positively engaged in listening and in addressing things that we see as causing conflict within the institution.
If I can make a comment. Sure. I agree. I think it's very important for faculty and staff to know that the board cares, that we're there for them, and that, we're open to hear any comments. But they also need to understand that, and this is something that I've learned throughout the last few months, that there's so much we can do as board members. Like we want them to feel supported by us and do everything that we can on our end to support them. But it's also important for them to understand that if they bring things to us, we are limited as to what we can do since we're not a managing board.
Totally agree.
But yeah, I agree that there's a need for the community to know that, yes, we're here to support you, but also know our limitations to us board members.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Chair, Director Foley.
Emeritus. I'm hearing a couple of different things that maybe we want to tease out of this. One is your letter was sent without a board group discussion. And I think there's some concern that points or nuances or something that a conversation of that kind would have added to the letter are not there. I think that's one point. Second is I've had conversations over the years with employees who wanted to bring specific issues to me, usually at Collectivo. And I've had to explain to them the limits of a policy board and why specifically with anything that's HR related, we can't deal with individually, certainly, and probably not as a board because of our review, our appellate review function, if there's an actual complaint. There is not good, in my experience, there is not a good understanding of that differentiation among either faculty members or members of the administration. And they just don't get it, or they didn't get it. Hopefully they got it after I explained it, but I think we have to somehow communicate that distinction more than we have in the past. I think your letter was designed to do that in part, and that was part of
Well, there's
what
two
you said.
letters actually, and so
That
the
we-
one was very specific
About
about what you're talking about right
Right.
now, because it is getting all mixed together. And even when Director Kay said, and then there was this other training, like
there are all these issues that are getting very, and part of it was not wanting to sit on the communication because that one specifically one had taken a long time to get to that point. And so part of it was like wanting to know that the timeliness of the response also played into wanting to know, like, we're not sitting on it, but there is, as we're aware, a growing, I guess, and we're seeing the unaware, you know, the employees that are unaware that the incidents should be we're getting included on stuff, as you said, that it is tainting potentially a process down the road in which the board may have to play a part in. And that was very critical to let people know, like, this actually can play against you in the long term because we're seeing more stuff than we should, and that we are not a managing board. So
and
part of that was
that's the key, that I don't think everybody understands that we're not a managing board. And, you know, they think that we know everything that's going on, and we don't. I mean, you know, we get what we get and we review it ahead of time, but we don't necessarily know the day to day. And, you know, that's what I have encouraged others when they've gone to me and I say, bring it out to the board meeting, because that's the best way. And that was your suggestion when I first joined the board, you know, because there's concerning issues. But unfortunately, our hands are tied to an extent, you know.
Well, and, you know, people see us, we're public officials, and if we've got a complaint, who's the guy in charge? I'm gonna send a letter to the guy in charge. You know what I mean? There is a thing that, and that's gonna continue to happen to us, and that's, I think your second letter was actually very useful in telling people, you know, you're actually hurting yourself here. You know, that you're potentially, as the word you use, tainting the process. You know, we could be on a level that you appeal to at a point. And so I think that was very helpful. It's people are still going to send us stuff because we're public officials, and it's unfortunate, but true. But I do think your second letter was very helpful.
I suggest, and maybe council needs to think about this, but maybe we need a form letter that we can use when those things do come to us, and just respond with the form letter. I can't look at this because, and then the messaging will be consistent, and it'll be reinforced when there are things that are outside the bounds. That would make it simpler than draft. I want to respond to these people in that way, or sometimes I want to respond to them other ways, but don't.
There is a case that's going on right now, and I would just caution us, and I don't want to speak for attorneys, but there's a case going on in Mount Pleasant right now that is in the Journal Sentinel this morning, you know, and we have to be careful as public officials. People are allowed to send us stuff whether we want to see it or not. And you know, that's happening right now in a not real pleasant way down there. And so I think we have to be cautious that we're not telling people, oh no, you cannot send something to the board because we're public guys.
That's why I wanted to be carefully crafted communication, and that we're not on our own trying to draft such things, and that we're not simply leaving the impression that we're ignoring people either. But I don't think that we should be the ones drafting that, and I think there are ramifications for the process that need to be taken into account, and that's why it's up to you, obviously, President Martin, but I think you probably want the general counsel staff to address whether this should be done, and if so, what should be said and when should it be used. That's my only comment on it.
So I'm from Director Baker and Director Foley's comments. I'm trying to process all the different pieces of it. I think as a policy board, and I know you mentioned not necessarily feeling satisfied with hearing reports from the facilitator, but at the same time, if our impact on culture in some ways is through policy, it is helpful, I think, for us to understand overarching themes and things that are coming out in a way that allows us to think through and potentially craft policy that would support the cultural changes. So I'm also processing what you said in the guidance to people to say, please don't send me the specifics of your case. What is helpful is for us to understand the overarching impacts that we're seeing so that we can understand, do we need a different type of policy? Do we need an amendment to help shift some of these cultural issues that are happening? So I think picking up on some of what you said and the education and not just saying we're not going to listen? Can we potentially say, here's why we can't hear this, but here's what is appropriate, and even to the facilitator, say these are the things that are helpful for us. It also then keeps us out of the confidential stuff. It also takes us out of the concern of employees and staff that we're going to get a report out on who said what, or potentially get details that may make us know who that person is, right? So I'm wondering if we can sort of merge those two ideas into a response of some sort to help shift things that are helpful and actionable to us.
I would agree with that, but there is another possibility, and that is simply to say, if we get any of those communications, we as individuals don't respond to them. We deliver them all to the chair, we deliver them all to somebody,
right,
and leave the response to that person. Again, I don't have a recommendation as to which of those is likely to work the best. I suspect the lawyers will want to have one person responding to everything.
We already have a board policy that the board chair speaks for the board.
Right.
So that's already part of our.
Yeah, but this is a little different. I mean, I would have interpreted that to mean I don't go out and give speeches purporting to represent the board. What we're talking about here now is responding to something that comes in the mail. You open it, or my secretary opens it, and here it is. Okay, now what do I do with it? If we need to clarify that that's what's going to happen, I think we need some clarity and maybe a little more thinking about how we respond to these things. Similarly, if somebody approaches me in person, I want to have a very strong understanding of what I need to say to them. And for me, it would be better, you know, if I read something which is the simple answer that I could remember.
And just say, let me get my phone and read it.
If I may say something. I think everybody is concerned about this, regardless of what side you are in. And like everybody was talking about, is sometimes the lack of information about from both of sides, like how far can we go. But at the same time, those letters were very helpful because it it's the first step to kind of let people know kind of what the procedures are, and now everybody's kind of probably understand better how far we can take it. But they also need to know that we are concerned about it and we would like to take it as far as we can, and not in a way that is a bad way. It's just, okay, how can we really be very transparent and reinforce the trust on every side, right? It's like, yeah, we are concerned about this. We really care about it. Of course, there's procedures and limitations that we have, and everybody has to kind of utilize the best possible ways to actually come into a conclusion for this, or at least understanding how it is. But everybody needs to play a little bit of a role in this, on how we can reinforce the trust on all sides, right? And people are concerned. We need to hear about it. We need to empathize with it, right? And see how far we can, at least that we care about it. And now people are understanding what the processes are, having these conversations publicly. They know that, yeah, we are having a conversation about what we should be doing, what's the best way to do it, right? We are doing that, and probably that's probably the first step they want to kind of know from the beginning. It's like, yeah, we are discussing this, and like I said, those letters were very helpful, and just the trust factor is just very important, I think.
Well, I've already seconded one thing on amendment today, so I kind of second Director Foley's idea here of having some language we can use, because again, I got something in the mail, and what did I do? I took a picture of it and I sent it to you, and I sent it to you, because that's what I'm not going to respond to it, and that's what I think I should do. And generally, all of the emails we get, I file them or whatever. But it is true, I think all of us get approached by people within the college, and we're all, and we're all genuinely interested in what happens in the institution. That's why we're here. And I don't want to feel like I'm arm's length from the institution, and I don't want any of our students or our staff to think that I'm aloof or something. So, I think this is a helpful conversation. And I think a little bit of language that people can use so that we can say,
please know that I'm not responding. It's kind of like we do when people speak in public comments. You know, I'm not responding because in my role as a board member, that's not something I can do. Please do not take it that we don't care and that as a board, we are not addressing issues.
That
of
is
climate
very
on the
important.
It's just not
campus.
happening publicly.
Mhm,
I can't individually
mhm.
have this, you know, conversation. But, you know, and that could be really helpful for people to have that. And it's certainly in our board orientations.
I was just gonna say, this could be included in the retreat, like the one we had a few months
Yeah.
ago.
And that's why we did that, because I know that this is new work for people. And to Janice's point, that when the board talks, do you want to address that board policy?
I would just like to ask that if we want to have further discussion on this, is not noticed on our agenda
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, excuse me, pardon me, I can't hear anything Janice says.
She is just saying that we're getting too deep into the conversation because this topic is not noticed on the agenda. So we have to be careful about talking about this topic too much.
So I would just suggest that if the board wants to have further discussion about this at next month's meeting and discuss language that they're comfortable with, the other thing that I would suggest the board have further conversation about is, as your spokesperson for the board, is there clarity around what you want that to be? So we can pull the policy that talks about what we have in place. Are there revisions you want to make to that, suggestions you want to make to that policy that talks about? So again, I just think there's further discussion. It seems like I'm hearing that the board would like to have around this topic. And I would just suggest if you want to do that, that we do notice that topic since it wasn't noticed for this meeting.
I would agree. And it is part of our retreat where we started to talk about this, the role of a board. And I think we did that in that short amount of time. That's why we said we need a full day in July and that we will have 2 more board members joining us, which will be new. And we need to deeply dive into it so people understand the role of a policy, because many of us serve on a variety of different boards, and that's, you know, taking in that experience. So we have to collectively come to those understandings and know what policies exist, and then our interpretations of those policies or where clarifications need to be made. So we'll take that into consideration if that's something that we want to start next time, but knowing that with the addition of 2 new board members coming on, we want to make sure that they're part of that conversation also as we move into the next year. So we'll leave it at that, and we will now move on to.
Okay, can I just say one thing since everybody's leaving it at that? I realize I'm leaving, but here's all I want to say. Be careful what you write, who writes it, and what you say, and how you say it. And if anybody wants to ask me about that, I'll tell them in July. But I want you to really be very careful about these. I like what Chair, doggone it, I apologize, Chair Olson. I like what Director Foley said, because we really need to be cautious about what we say and do, because in the scheme of everything, first of all, it ain't what the rules say, is who interprets what's on the rule. And the other thing is we have to be very careful that we don't turn people off in the process of the rule. And that's all I have to say.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We'll continue that discussion. I think it was a start of that, but we'll make sure that we get that on the agenda. I think now we can do the president's report on the third start.
All right. Well, thank you, Chair Olson. Good evening, board members, faculty, staff, and if there's any students and community members. We began this month's cycle with an in-person visit from our Achieving the Dream coaches. They met with our student success team, our data team, the DEI task force, and 3 project teams. The coaches stated that there is great enthusiasm at MATC for the student success work among the groups they met with. And they're going to be returning to our campus in the fall to follow up on these projects. They just said it was remarkable that every single group they met with, their total focus was on students and their success. Meetings were held with an internal group of ours, along with a Washington, DC lobbyist firm. And we have submitted applications for congressionally directed spending requests, formerly known as earmarks, to the offices of Representative Gwen Moore, Scott Fitzgerald, and Senator Tammy Baldwin for 2 projects. The first project is the consolidation and expansion of welding programs at our Walker Square Education Center to offer bilingual welding and heavy plate welding training. And we'll be the first training site in Wisconsin to offer this and the only heavy plate welding training. The second project is the expansion of our truck driver program at the Oak Creek campus through the addition of a new driving track and related facilities and equipment. Tomorrow, we are launching the MATC Leadership Academy in conjunction with the Mitchell Group, which, as you know, is part of my goals and is linked to our strategic plan. I'd like to thank our Vice President, Elle Bonds, and Jane Byer for their work in bringing this vision to life for our college. On April 20th, I was honored to provide a welcome at the HSI Day of Engagement. Directors Diaz and Mendieta Ramos joined me as we kicked off the event that included information about our intentional efforts to become a HSI Hispanic Serving Institution, workshops, and a keynote address by the U.S. Department of Education HSI Program Specialist Margarita Melendez, who visited all of our campuses as well as our Walker Square site. She was very excited. She loved meeting all the people. She was just a joy to have here. A highlight of the program was the luncheon panel that included several of our alums who shared their experience at the college. Their stories of how they persisted to earn their degrees with the support and help of our college faculty and staff were very powerful. Thanks to our Chief Diversity Officer, Eva Martinez-Paulus, and the HSI Task Force for planning and hosting the event. And if there's any other comments that by Directors Diaz or Mendieta Ramos about the event, it'd be great if you would share any ideas or thoughts that you have about the event.
Well, like everybody knows, I'm very passionate about that. It was a great event, Eva. I'd like to congratulate you for that. We should have more of those. But yeah, it's just informs people about the process of how we can achieve that goal. It would be very important, and I'm looking forward to see that day that we can achieve that denomination. And I just gotta say that let's do more of those.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it was great. So Eva, again, congratulations on doing such a great job. Like you mentioned, the highlight was definitely listen to the students and their success and how they, all the benefits that they got from attending METC beyond their education and the connections that they made. I think that was very important for people to hear. I hope that that message got across to many people, since I know that we're doing a Facebook Live, and I welcome everybody who missed it to go back and listen to them. I really enjoyed listening to that and definitely seeing the presence of other institutions in here. I think that was great. I felt that it was giving us support, and we can achieve that goal. Let's work towards it.
Yeah, great. Thanks again for being there. Really appreciate it. And then on April 22nd, as part of our Moonshot for Equity initiative, we attended the last of the 12 e-convenings from the USC Race and Equity Center called Repairing Historical Racial Harm. The information that we learned over the past 12 months has helped to inform and frame our conversations around race and equity, both within our college and with our colleagues at UW Parkside, Carthage College, and Carroll University. And finally, I'm honored to share with you that I've been invited to be the co-chair for the Hispanic Professionals of Greater Milwaukee's Gala, to be held this September with the theme Reimagining Our Story. Our students have received scholarships to attend MATC from HPGM, and they've really benefited from those. So that was my report.
Thank you. Any other follow-up questions for Dr. Martin on that? I know that we do not have our students with us tonight due to a conflict. And so item D then is the enrollment report. So I will be calling on Sarah Adams for that.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'll drop that here. So we have the first screen, thank you. So as this semester comes to a close, we're at 87.7% of our goal for this academic year. There may be some additional very small amounts of FTEs, but we are currently looking at closing this academic year with our FTEs around 7,719. We are currently working on enrollment for the upcoming summer and fall. We began our enrollment this month in April, and in the May board meeting, we'll be able to share out some of those numbers. We're just a little too early in the process right now. So we'll be able to share that during our May board meeting. Next slide, please.
this slide and Ava will talk about the financial impact of the FTEs.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Excuse me. So just a couple of brief comments on the impact to our financial impact on the decline in enrollments. As Dr. Adams pointed out, and we'll elaborate a little bit more on when I present the budget report, we are behind our budget by about 12.3%. And what that really equates to in terms of revenue, based on 100 FTEs, every decline in 100 FTEs is equivalent to about $571,000 in revenue. So if you do the math, the lost revenue could approximate nearly $6 million. Throughout this entire fiscal year, the business office and administrators and staff have been engaged in working to curtail discretionary spending and to prioritize open positions. And so that is one way that we're attempting to, we are closing that budget gap, as well as utilizing her funds, which we are eligible to claim for our lost operating revenue. And again, I'll elaborate a little bit more on that when I present the budget report.
Just one quick question. Do you feel we're in very similar position with our peer colleges? This isn't unique to us, that the numbers were a little behind on our goals.
The FTE numbers, yes, I believe most of the colleges. I don't have their exact numbers in front of me.
But that was, yes.
Any other follow-up questions for Sarah? Okay, thank you. Next, we have the Milwaukee PBS General Manager's Report and Bodan Zachary. This time you can stay up here longer than 30 seconds, or.
Good afternoon, Chair Olson, MATC board members, Dr. Martin. This afternoon, I'd like to devote my report to talking about how seriously we take journalism and best editorial practices at Milwaukee PBS. During a time when misinformation and biased journalism on TV and online and on radio are sadly becoming the norm, Milwaukee PBS continues its commitment to presenting viewers with well-researched, grounded, and unbiased information on the local programs it produces, Adelante, Black Nouveau, and 1036, and in the stories and podcasts it publishes online at our website, milwaukeepbs.org. We are determined to maintaining the highest journalistic standards that PBS television and NPR public radio are known for. It's a high ideal, and I'll admit that we often face challenges reaching those goals. That's why Milwaukee PBS has invited all staff to a 90-minute interactive webinar next week on the topics of editorial integrity and journalistic standards and the critical importance of maintaining an editorial firewall. Our guest speakers will be Kathy Merritt, who is Senior Vice President of Radio and Journalism at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and Talia Rosen, who is Assistant General Counsel and Senior Director of Standards and Practices at PBS. These experts have been presenting information to PBS and NPR journalists and producers at stations across the country, and we look forward to meeting with them virtually on May 4th. Turning to a recent collaboration with our news colleagues at CBS 58, which was the mayoral candidate special, we will be discussing future possible projects. This is just one example of Milwaukee PBS working with other like-minded, high-ranking journalists in the area. Now I want to pivot to another longtime editorial collaborator, Pbs Wisconsin in Madison. This fall, when Wisconsin's gubernatorial and senatorial elections dominate news, Milwaukee PBS and Pbs Wisconsin in Madison will collaborate on stories that are intended to air on both stations. And lastly, we are still awaiting word from the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association about whether Milwaukee PBS will serve as the site for the Gubernatorial and senatorial debates that are locked for October 7th and October 14th. I'll obviously share that news with you as soon as I know about it. That concludes my report for this month, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I'm not seeing any questions. So,
Thank you very much for that report.
Thank you.
And did we say that Ramey was here? There she is back there, sorry. So next we have our legislative matters report with Ramey Zelenkova. Live in person.
It's been a while.
I know.
Good to see everyone. Good evening. You should have a detailed report in front of you this evening, so I'll go over the highlights and then be available for any questions. The legislative session is adjourned. So now we are in the legislative interim. In the report, I have provided an update on all of the final legislative activity of the legislation we followed throughout the legislative session. Generally speaking, you can look at that at your convenience, and if there are questions this evening, I'm certainly happy to answer anything specific. I do want to highlight a couple of areas that have really taken up the most attention throughout the legislative session. Generally speaking, all COVID-related legislation that would restrict local control on vaccine policy, proof of vaccine, in-person learning, tuition refund, etc. Those proposals that did make it through were vetoed by the governor. Final action occurred just a couple of weeks ago on those. Also legislation specific to academic free speech, protesting on campus, a bill called reference the Parental Bill of Rights, which would codify a number of how I will define protections already in the Constitution and law, which would then generate potential legal action in the educational space. Those proposals were also vetoed at the end of session. And then I also want to specifically highlight legislation specific to police academy programs. The legislation itself would have benefited our police academy programs. It would have been funded though with federal ARPA dollars. It would have directed the governor to use those dollars. And he's been consistent in vetoing legislation that dictated how he would spend of federal dollars. So those general proposals I wanted to highlight specifically for all of you. Happy to answer any questions on other proposals. If I can't pull them off the top of my head, I'm happy to follow up there. Now that we are in the legislative interim, legislative study committees have been established, and I saw Dr. Isahaku in the back. And I'm only looking at him tonight because there is a study committee similar to one he served on in the past, specific to offender reentry employment for those who are formerly incarcerated or currently incarcerated. There is a new study committee in that space. Just for educational, informational purposes, legislative study committees are comprised of elected officials and members of the public. The work occurs during the legislative interim. They are staffed by support staff, legislative support staff, and then they receive presentations, they vet issues, they kind of do all of the kind of research, if you will, throughout the process, compile a report, make recommendations for legislation. Most of the time, the committees are able to produce thoughtful reports, reports that are bipartisan in nature. Very often, legislation that's recommended will move through the process without much effort. That does not always happen. And there is a time commitment to serve. So I've shared that, we've discussed it at the task force, that there is an opportunity if MATC would like to participate. Again, it is a time commitment for an individual. Certainly we're also able to present to the committee and provide information as well if we're not formally presenting. So that is one committee that I expect to be monitoring at the minimum for the college. There's also a legislative council study committee on occupational licensing. I think that has a broader reach. There's much more in that space in general as it relates to stakeholders, both from a number of different professions. I think that's one that will be of interest, again, to monitor is my recommendation on that one in particular. So moving away from the legislative components, I also have at the end of your document a list of announced retirements. Of course, that's already out of date because we had another announcement about an hour ago. Senator Quinga is now not running for re-election after first saying he was running for re-election and then redistricting put him out of his district. And then the second map put him back in, and he said he's running, and now he's announced he's not running. So a correction already to be added there. We also have a new gubernatorial announcement as well, which I've included those announced candidates in the report, but there was an announcement over the weekend. A new Republican has entered the gubernatorial race. So slightly out of date, but perhaps it will be final now. We'll know officially June 1st, now that potential candidates can circulate the nomination papers and run for office. I continue to just include redistricting and general election issues, primarily because they are relevant and grab the headlines for all of you. And then last, I'll just end on, Dr. Martin already referenced some federal projects that the college is pursuing. And also in the report, I included just an update on student loan repayment forgiveness that the Biden administration has extended that through the end of August. So with that, I'm happy to answer any specific questions.
Amy, I have a question with the announcement of so many retirements in the legislature. What impact could that have on some of the bills or some of the people who had gotten some background, whether, you know, on the technical college system and understand that, like, what does that mean? And what does it mean for advocacy for us as board members?
That's a good question. So we have about 30 announced retirements so far. That's huge. That's probably now officially made history in terms of announced retirements, both in the Senate and the Assembly. So what that means is we will have a number of new faces, not only specific to our district, but you will see new committee chairs. Senator Quang is a good example. He chairs colleges and universities now. He's been a very good advocate for the college. He's also a member of the Joint Finance Committee, which is the most powerful committee to be on because they really dictate and set the state budget. And so we'll see a number of new committee chairs, committee members, some shuffling up the deck in leadership positions as well. In the Senate, both the Assembly Minority Leader and Assistant Minority Leader are retiring. The Assembly have already determined new leaders. Of course, that can change at any time, but generally speaking, we have a number of leadership retirements, both in both caucuses and both houses. So that is a huge learning curve because new people are coming in. They may have areas of expertise that are helpful, or they may end up on committees that we care about, but they don't have an area of expertise. So we really have to start all over. I think this past session was also particularly challenging because of COVID. We had a lot of new faces come in this past session, and even the prior sessions, there've been a lot of turnover. So there's always opportunity there, but that also creates a number of challenges. And so in the past, and obviously COVID impacted this greatly, I think we've done a good job with hosting legislative breakfasts. We do have some legislators who proactively reach out for tours, you know, so I think we'll see more of that. Again, the last 2 years made that a little more challenging. And again, collaborating with our district boards association will be important because they will develop different types of relationships than the college because they have, you know, the entire state. So it is going to be a little more work, but every session usually is for one reason or another because you see some shifts. This is just going to be a little more substantial than most legislative sessions.
Okay, anybody else? Thank you very much.
Okay,
Could
thank you.
I just let me plant this seed with you. With that number of new people across the whole state, maybe the District Boards Association should do something for legislators in general. What if you can help define what that something is, but to teach them about the college system?
Sure. So they do have an advocacy day at the beginning of each session, which I think is helpful for introductory meetings. Just sometimes they have their budget requests aligned that we can incorporate those. That's helpful. I have some organizations that have, you know, academies, we'll call them academies, where they'll invite legislators to come in and just learn the basics. Certainly the legislature is staffed by nonpartisan service agencies, both the Legislative Council, the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, and the Legislative Reference Bureau, and they get sort of like a training and then, you know, mentorships with existing legislators. But I do like that idea. I'm a big believer in developing those relationships and trying to educate and mentor individuals. Sometimes it comes to something that you wouldn't have expected. So I think definitely, you know, carry that message to the District Board Association, and I would be happy to as well.
And clearly, we're going to have a few new, I mean, at least Representative Rostoff and Bowen, and, you know, so we have several that turn over in our district alone for us to host something, and we've always done that really nicely. in the
Yeah, I think
past.
so as well.
Yeah.
And legislators love tours. I think we've done some stuff with our food service programs. I know there's a legislator who always raves about coming here to have some barbering services, salon services. She really enjoys that. So those are always good opportunities as well. There you go.
Do we take people from advocacy day? I don't know. I know we did something on Zoom a couple of
Yeah, we
years
had
ago.
that. There was
Normally
a
it's in
virtual
person.
breakfast a
Okay,
couple years
okay.
ago that we did. And
But do we ever go in person? We used to.
Normally.
We used
Yeah,
to.
normally,
Okay.
yeah.
I know I did. But
The once and future
Yeah.
visits.
I will say, I think the Zoom option, we actually were able to get a little more participation.
We were,
Oh.
yeah.
Which was nice, and I found that with some clients where they found that kind of a hybrid approach, it's not only because of COVID, it's actually increased participation too. So we'll see, if they continue to do something like that or offer both options and setting up meetings. I think the legislators, liked it as well. For the flexibility.
It does, yeah. I think it's good to have both, those who want the either press opportunities, because a lot of people like to post that they were visiting and doing tours, but I also think some people's schedules, just because you've got to drive in that, the virtual thing at least gives them that connection. So yeah, I thought it was a very well attended virtual breakfast.
And I think some can be spread out across a couple of days versus trying to get 10 meetings in one day. That could be hard because you have to kind of go through real quickly and really hit just very high level talking points.
Good, okay. Well,
Okay.
stay updated as
Thank
we
you.
move into election season.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Next, we have our diversity, equity, and inclusion report with Eva Martinez-Palas.
Good evening, everyone. Always so good to see you. Thank you so much for having me today about the DEI update. So I do have a quick update related to the President's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. So I am happy to report that we have concluded the recommendations to the President and have delivered the DEI plan to the President about a week ago. The next step in the process is to present the DEI plan to the Cabinet for review and input. And we are currently developing a timeline for how we will be implementing some of these initiatives at MATC moving forward. We are looking at this DEI plan from different lenses. We are focusing on the climate. We are also focusing on the student experience, the employee experience, and also the institutional commitment that we have at MATC. So more to come in that area, but wanted to give you a quick update on where we are. We are hoping that the task force will transition into a DI steering committee to be able to help us oversee the initiatives in collaboration with our colleagues and other departments across MATC. I think that the work of the task force has been amazing in terms of input and collaboration and really help us gather the feedback and input that we needed to help the DEI office, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion office, fully understand the MATC story and how to move forward in that area. So that's a quick update. Also, in terms of the HSI Day of Engagement, I also publicly would like to thank the planning team. We had a team of individuals, which included Dr. Maria Solano, Professor Cynthia Galvan. We also had Arlene Garcia Novelli, who's our HSI liaison. And then we also have Jose Solorzano as part of the team. So I'd like to thank and congratulate the team as well. As we were working through the President's Task Force, we were very intentional in how we viewed the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in terms of how do we move forward and create that vision for the office. And we know that we have worked very extensively within our employee experience. And we also continue to really identify the areas and deliverables for the student experience itself and what the DEI office means at MATC at the district in terms of moving the needle related to the student equity gap. I've also been part of the retention team in the last couple of months, working directly with Dr. Jeff Jans, and I know that we have been working also with institutional research in helping us understand the DEI story in terms of the data. So for example, I like to highlight a couple of data points that we continue to identify as benchmarks for how the office is also looking at not only providing the programming and providing the support through the ombuds and other buckets, but also really focus on making data-informed decisions in terms of the focus and vision for the office. So for example, when we looked at, and Dr. Jeff Jans is here as well, who has been instrumental in helping establish the student success data along with other teams at MATC. So for example, if you look at the core success rates by race and ethnicity of first-time degree-seeking MATC students, 72% of white students persisted from fall 2021 to spring 2022. 57% of Black African-American students persisted from fall 2021 to spring 2022. This demonstrates a 15% lower persistence rate for Black African-American students compared to their white counterparts. So that's a data point that we continue to look at and identify as a benchmark for how we move forward. In addition to that, if you look at our Hispanic student population, of first-time degree-seeking MATC students, 72% of white students persisted from fall 2021 to spring 2022, I repeated that. Of that, 64% of all Hispanic students persisted from fall 2021 to spring 2022. This demonstrates an 8% lower persistent rate for Hispanic students compared to white students at MATC. So as you can see, when it comes to building and sustaining diversity, equity, and inclusion work at the college, we have different buckets, and one of them is the student experience at MATC when it comes to our students feeling included in sense of belonging, but also making sure that the decisions we're making are really based on the data that we are seeing from the course success rates, from the persistence and retention rates and graduation rates, but then also from our climate studies that we have currently at MATC. So with that, I conclude my report, and I am happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Bowen.
Statistics are not my forte, but I have this question about the statistics you just gave us. What evidence is there that these differentials between white students and other categories are not just reflected in racial statistics, but caused by racial differences, as opposed to race having become a proxy for something else? So I'm going to make this up now because I have no idea what the data would support, but let's suppose that there is a significant family financial difference between white students and Black students or Hispanic students. Is it the financial difference rather than race, which is the cause, and therefore the place where effort needs to be applied, as opposed to simply saying our Black students aren't doing as well on persistence? Have we looked at the data that way? We drilled down, we disaggregated it. We've done regression analyses, whatever else, whatever
sounds like
other
you like
buzz.
Yeah, I know. Regression analysis.
Have we done that?
So we are in the process of disaggregating the data. So I know Dr. Jeff Jans and Dr. Wang, some of the conversations that we have, and when I first arrived at MATC, I asked that question. So we know that across the nation, when you look at inequities within the classroom, across higher ed, is not solely just on race. It's also the intersection of being a first generation student, being a low income student, okay, being in different zip codes, for example, within different cities and counties, and it's also race, right? So when you're looking at, let's say, Black students and Hispanic students, race may be a factor in terms of the climate within the classroom, but once you begin to add socioeconomic status and you begin to add the first generation status, then you have those compounded barriers to success. So, so we're getting there. I think Dr. Jeff Jans is also very happy with the data, and we continue to dig in and we continue to fully understand the story that when it comes to serving different populations, sometimes it's not just one factor, it's multiple factors and intersecting factors that play a role in a student's holistic development and success. So thank you for that question.
Okay, and then what we do to address to try to rectify the, or I don't know what rectify isn't the right word, but to try to address these differences, how do we then decide where we're going to put our effort so that if 50% of the cause is economics, we can probably have a bigger impact on the success of our subgroups based on addressing that issue somehow rather than others. So
Yes.
is that the next step?
Yes. So the next step is evaluating the current data that we have. So for example, the retention team, along with Dr. Jans, have been doing an evaluation of the services that we provide at MATC. For example, if we were providing Chromebooks to students during the pandemic, and really evaluating whether or not that service has an impact on the student success. So that is the next point. What are the services that we have, and how are those services impacting our students of color and other different populations? I know at the last meeting you also heard a little bit about the Men of Color initiative. That Men of Color is a high impact program that is having an impact on student success. Is that a program that we would like to scale up per se, or is that a program that we would like to keep and continue to grow more at a local scale? So the services are critical in terms of identifying what really works at MATC and how do we evaluate where we choose to invest based on the data. So I think how many, Dr. Jens, I don't like putting you on the spot, but how many areas for services have we identified for comparison data?
We have a total of 35 combined classifications of students and interventions or services we're providing. And they really provide us with one thing and one thing only, and that's correlation. So we can't assume cause effect. All we can do is say this is a factor. So the more we have and we combine them with race, ethnicity, gender, full-time, part-time status, using resources that we've given them in various ways, it starts to create a portfolio or a story that we can then use. So this is really just step one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm talking about what Director Fondy was talking about. Because last time, if I can recall correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, faculty, like for example, the Hispanic percentage of faculty is like it was about 7%.
Yes, 7.7.
So do you think that is also a factor in that could be into play here? Because
yes,
I mean, what we're trying to achieve is we're trying to that benchmark that we have for whites, which is the 72% you were talking about, which of course we would like it to be even higher for them and for any other group. But I think that it's also important that we understand the faculty side of it, because we are really behind there, you know. I mean, if you really want to bring it up to a different level, and you know, you have to have the ability, and especially what you were talking about, that's this first generation of students that are coming in, that sometimes the parents need a little bit of education as far as how the process works. And sometimes you need that channel of communication between sometimes even with the parent, just to retain that kid, right? So like, what is going on? You know, and from that point over, you know, we need everything that we can do to really bring those numbers up. I think that's another area that I mean, I would like to see going up too. You know, 7% is too low if you ask me.
Yes.
Because you know, we trying to achieve this HSI status. We're trying to, you know, bring our communities up to a different level. And we already stated all the challenges that we have: economical, cultural, first generation, and many others that I can go on and on. And I think that is another probably area that it probably needs to be looked at.
Absolutely. And along with the affirmative action plan, that the DI plan does address the areas, and also how the Office of DI will work with the different deans and pathways to be able to measure the diversity of faculty, and to be able to not only increase the faculty diversity, but how we retain those faculty members as well. And I believe Director Foley alluded to how there's a lot of research out there saying that when you have diversity within the classroom, or students want to see that their diversity reflected within the classrooms, within the hallways of an institution. So that is super critical to their sense of belonging to the institution. So thank you.
Good. Talk about causation, correlation, regression analysis. It's super fun and exciting, sorry. so thank you.
Thank you.
We are ready to move on to the board monitoring, of which we have 4 items under there. And the first is our pathway presentation on the ELL, Adult Basic Education, Community Education, and Dr. Duckworth.
Thanks so much, Chairperson, and good evening. Nice to see you. So we shared the presentation with you with narration. So we'll be, Dr. Isahak and myself will be happy to address any questions that you may have.
Any questions or items?
I have a question. I'm not finding the numbers here right now, but so maybe you can help me with that. But we have 117 faculty for this program. Roughly half are part-time, roughly half are full-time. And how many students?
Slightly over 5,000 students.
Okay. So is that a relatively high number?
Of faculty?
Yes, the faculty-student ratios are relatively high, relatively low, or about the same as across the college?
It's relatively higher than the rest of the college.
Okay.
Yep.
And why?
Because we're seeing some growth in this area while we're seeing decline in many other areas. The only exception is manufacturing. It's the only growing area this year. Yeah. Business management is about neutral, but beyond that, community education is the only growing area in the college.
Okay, so you're staffing up.
We are, and I think you need to know that the full-time part-time ratio is not reflective of the overall ratio in the college, because it seems like an equal number, 1-to-1 ratio.
Mm-hmm.
The ratio in the college is 4-to-1, 4 full-time to 1 part-time faculty.
Okay.
Roughly.
So is the higher part-time faculty ratio for this particular area caused by a lack of full-time candidates or budgets or just sheer numbers? What are we looking at?
I think Dr. Baker had the answer. And so it's really a number of CBOs that we have. We are out in the community, and that's really the only way for us to really try to meet the needs of the community-based organizations and different locations that we have to go to.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
This has always been an area that amazes me at MATC. I mean, I just think, this is a place where we take a deep dive into the community and are really like that bridge that help people get from where they are into good occupational programs. I love and I'm forgetting what we call it now, where it's parallel, where you can actually be enrolled in your occupational program while you're getting your basic skill training, which used to be separated.
Yep, IET. Yep.
Thank you.
Sure.
Which is a wonderful innovation. I just think the role that MATC plays in our community through this program is phenomenal.
Well, thank you so much. And in the presentation, one slide shows that transition to college is the highest in the state. So I think we're really proud of that. I'm not as proud of the other one, which shows that we're not as successful in certain areas within the community education, but by far we're number 1 in the state when it comes to transitioning students from community education to college. And this is documented success.
Any other questions or comments? Appreciate getting the information in advance to be able to look to it, because usually about this time we start to get a little saturated. So to be able to pace that out, having watched it or seen that earlier is appreciated.
And
so.
I listened to Dr. Ishaku, very warm voice, by the way.
It is. It was
Thank you.
So thank you very much. Next item is the fiscal year 22 year-end projection of general fund and review of the fiscal year 23 preliminary operating budget. And so
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to step in for Jeff while he's on vacation. Again, I'm Eva Keither. I'm the controller here at MATC, and I really have the privilege of working with a very committed and talented business office staff who've really put forth great effort in working with staff and administration this year to prepare a realistic budget during a period in which we are experiencing constrained resources and really unique financial challenges and uncertainties. So this evening, I will be walking through at a high level the attachment 8B, which presents a projection of our current fiscal year 22 budget, as well as our draft upcoming fiscal year 23 budget. And our focus will be on the two columns on the far right side of this document. The column in green is our current fiscal year 22 projection, and the column in orange is our draft upcoming fiscal year 23 budget. For your reference and comparison, the two columns on the left present fiscal year 21's actual performance. That's in yellow. That's our most recent actual fiscal year. And then our current fiscal year budget, which is in blue. And those two columns are for your reference. So there's a few big picture comments that I'd like to begin with. First, you will see at the bottom of the document in the row that's kind of pink in color, surplus or deficit, that the current FY22 projection in the green column is reflecting a deficit of approximately 1.3 million. Now, it's important to note here that additional savings measures are still in play that include, as I mentioned earlier, the continued curtailing of discretionary spending and holding vacant positions open. We do anticipate balancing our current year budget by continuing to manage these savings efforts over the next 2 months. As for our upcoming FY23 budget, again, the far right column in orange, in accordance with the goals of leadership and with our most fundamental financial objective, we are presenting a balanced budget for FY23. But it should be noted that our draft 23 budget does not include a pay increase. A pay increase has yet to be determined at this time. So for the moment, I'd like to take a focus a little bit on revenue. So if you, at about the midway point, it's hard to talk through all this, such a detailed document. I want to just hit a couple of high level points. So at about the midway point of this document, you will see a total revenue row, which is directly above the row that's highlighted in gray and then near the middle of the document. If we focus on this row highlighted in gray, we can see how our total revenue budget has fluctuated. You will see that for the current fiscal year, which is the green column, we are projecting our total revenues to come in at about $2.9 million less than what we've budgeted, which is again the blue column. You will also see that for our draft 23 budget, the orange column, we are predicting that our total revenues will decrease about another 1.6 million compared to this year. Now, there are a couple of key factors that are impacting revenue, and we always talk about enrollment and FTEs because that is the primary driver input to our budget. So continued decline in instability in enrollments or FTEs is obviously the root cause of our declining revenues. And this can really be seen in the third row under the heading of statutory program fees, which presents our tuition revenues. You can see that we budgeted $36.8 million in tuition revenue for this current fiscal year, our blue column there, which is based on budgeted FTEs of 8,800. Yet we are predicting to end this fiscal year with only about 7,725 FTEs and corresponding revenues of only about 31.5 million. So you see that fluctuation in revenue, which I alluded to earlier when we were talking about enrollments, which is about 5.2, I think 5.5 million. See. For our upcoming fiscal 23 budget, we are predicting 8,300 FTEs. And when we factor in the WTCS tuition increase of 1.7%, we are expecting about 34 million in tuition revenues. Okay. Another key factor impacting total revenue on these budget reports is the college's eligibility for HERF funding, which I also mentioned a little bit earlier. Under HERF's lost revenue provision, the college is eligible to claim funding for lost operating revenue resulting from the pandemic. So if you look at the included in the federal revenue total, which is just above the total revenue. For this current year, for current fiscal 22, which is our green column, you can see, you can see about a little over 6 million in our federal revenue total. Well, that includes 6 million of HERF lost revenue funds. And then if you go just to the right and look at our FY23 budget, we factored in another $1 million for FY23. And we all know at the college that this emergency funding has really been vital to enabling MATC to balance both our current budget and as well as our forthcoming budget. And obviously the effort is to, we keep using the term right size, but to right size our budgets to bring them down to our current enrollment levels. And we want to, we need to not get accustomed to obviously to having these HERF funds, but they have come in very helpful to help us close our budget gap. I think I'll pause here, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Okay.
Let me ask this
sure.
question, and maybe you're not the right person to ask this, but we are projecting a significant upturn in enrollment.
Yes.
We were wrong about that last time.
Right.
How did we get to 8,300?
Well, I can introduce the topic by saying that there was a cross-functional team that was involved in, predicting our FTEs for the upcoming year. And I know that we use a model in the college that looks at like two economic indicators, one being obviously unemployment, and the other one is the numbers of students coming through junior year, I think, high school students. And that produced a number that was very large. It was way inflated. So I think, is Tony Tyler? Yeah, he's here. I heard you comment on this in the past about, because you're part of that team that, so maybe you could comment a little bit more on how that number was arrived at.
Sure. And Nadine and I actually participated together in looking at really drilling down to the historic analysis, along with a group of people. The number that the model predicted was, I believe, 9,300 FTEs.
We'll take that.
Yeah. And we said, well, that is a stretch goal. And thought that wouldn't be really responsible to do in this time. But really looked at, it wasn't to the point of program by program, but it was segment by segment of where we lost enrollment. So if it's even like single parents, we've noticed that there's been a loss. Different ethnic groups, there's been a higher loss of African Americans and Hispanics. Like, we really tried to look to say, do we have enough going on that is really in these different areas to not get to 9,300, but a responsible number of the 8,300 felt like still a stretch, but one that felt that it was responsible.
Okay, so we just heard that one of the factors in the formula or the model is unemployment. Is there an inverse relationship between the unemployment rate and enrollment?
Correct.
So the more people who are unemployed, the higher the enrollment.
Correct.
That also suggests to me that money isn't an issue, because the people who are unemployed are going to have less discretionary income to spend on it. Is that a fair conclusion?
Well, I mean, what the data says is that when people are out of work and feeling the need to retool, they look for cost-effective places they can do that, and MATC is often that place. Okay. So I don't know across the board if like master's programs increase dramatically, but I know our population comes back to school when there aren't as many jobs, and that has been consistent. And it's not the unemployment rate, it's actually the Say that again?
The unemployment insurance claims.
Yes, unemployment insurance claims. That's the data point.
Yes, students are also looking for short term, something that they can come in very quickly and get a good job. And so that is why they tend to look at it as well. We did look at, we started with a different number than this, a little bit lower. And then we said, are there specific strategies that we could employ that would really make the difference and be actually increase our ability to actually get to that number? Because we didn't want to get it too high, like you said, which happened this last time. But if you really look at our data, even we saw summer was low, fall was a little bit higher, and then spring a little bit higher. And so we're hoping that we can build on that. We've got some systems and processes in place that will help with that. Some new areas that we're looking at as well. So I know that you came up with a number of different strategies. And so we felt pretty confident with that number of FTEs.
I'm just wondering if the model needs to be revised. I mean, the economy has clearly changed.
Yeah.
People's
Yes.
participation in it has changed. We have rising interest rates. We have predictions of a recession in the next 6 to 12 months.
I think it's, I'm not an IR, but Dr. Mannion, I would say that it's difficult because every year has been like completely different sets of circumstances that who would ever predict. So I don't think we have enough data yet to really look at what the trends are. Would be, but we're certainly evaluating it and seeing, you know, and I this is a factor that I'm going to look to you, Tony. We have a number of people that are coming in through the Promise from direct from high school. That is our largest class. So that's a surprise. So when we look at a goal in our the president's goals, one of the goals is to try to increase the market share of students coming direct from high school. The actual number of students coming direct from high school is small. So we're not going to be able to exponentially grow that, but could we grow the percentage of the total N, the total number of people coming of age? That's the strategy. And with the direct from high school promise, that has been really successful. We just are about to launch, it's a deadline on Saturday. Anybody who wants to participate in the new gap year experience that we did, we had the first cohort go through. We're expanding the number of seats available to that because we're seeing some students who went through that said, I don't even have to complete this because I didn't realize there was a thing called a medical interpreter where I could immediately use my Spanish, which I am, you know, Spanish speaking from birth, and I could actually come in and take a course and complete it fairly quickly and get to work in something I didn't even know existed as a career. So there's some neat things we're doing that I think are putting us in a different place, and people are looking at us differently, and we're trying to take advantage of the opportunity to open our doors wider.
Is the, I've forgotten what we've called the various levels of counselors, but the intake counselors are doing more under guided pathways in the form of career counseling, if you will, or career selection counseling than we used to do, I think.
I could actually help
And
with that.
so what the example you just gave is great. We now have approximately 50 people who know about this, including the student you're talking about.
Right.
What are we doing to get that message out? That people should be contacting us to find out what they can do in 6, 12, 16, whatever our weekly things are to improve your income right now.
Sure. So one of the things that we're doing first and foremost, I want to thank you for allowing me to come forth without being asked. I wanted to say that our counselors right now through our career hub, they're working one-on-one with our students. When our students are coming through our doors, one of the first things that we do is that we try to inform them about the options that they have, the pathways. So that is part of the pathways, right? And model. Another thing that we're doing is within admissions, we're working very closely with financial aid to ensure that if a student, for example, does not have the funding to pay for their courses, that they get that right away as soon as they're coming through. In addition, we're working with our retention coaches. So once the student signs up for courses through the advising office, they also get a pathway coach that will walk the student through the process. Now, within the intake approach, what we're doing is that we offer our students the options that they have. Short term and long term. So short term, it might be, let's say, 9 to 12 months, and long term, it might be up to 2.5 years, right? So the intention is to show them exactly how much it would cost, what is the type of funding that exists for them to pay for it. Also, what are the outlets for employment, whether they choose to go option A or option B. And then on top of that, we match the student with an employer as they are a student here through internships, and also the opportunity for the student to be interviewed once they're here as students. We have what is called a lot of fairs through our career hub, and the intention is to be able to connect our students with employers in the community.
Okay, so one last thing, and I'll be
Yep.
quiet here. Okay, so that's all great. That's all built into the guided pathway system. My question's a little different though, and that is, if I were to say to you, how many Spanish medical interpreter jobs are there in the southeastern quadrant of Wisconsin that are currently not filled? And if your answer is 50, who are the 50 people we're going to get to enroll in our program by telling them that right now?
Well, right now we're working, for example, in that example, we're working with HPGM. As we speak right now, they are the Hispanic professionals of Greater Milwaukee.
Got it. Okay.
And we're working with them just to meet exactly that, as well as our CNAs. There is a gap of CNAs, and we opened a course right now just for the students that are coming through HPGM, right? These courses are going to take place throughout the summer. And at the end of the summer, they're going to have a certificate, and we're going to put them in jobs because we know that there's a greater gap in that area. So again, it's not so much as to what we're doing with the advisors, although we're doing a lot of work with our advising team, it's also our connectedness with our CBOs in the community.
Thank you.
I'll just say one more example. The relationship between us and employers and how we're trying to strengthen the relationship so that our students have a shot at the positions that they're going for. And one example is that we have a cooperative education program where there was a student who had kept on applying at Aurora, but couldn't get through the front door. And it was until she was able to get a placement through this cooperative education program that she was able to get employed. So you have these, and she just couldn't get through their firewall for whatever reason. And it was us sitting down with their instructor and their hiring person to say, hey, through this program, we're trying to get students to earn and learn at the same time. And look, there's a person who applied, and she now works at Aurora. So I think that it's like relation systems, but trying to do it at scale so that we have the systems to impact. I think what you're getting to is the scalability.
Right.
And all these wheels have to be kind of turning at the same time, but it's the work of the Career Hub to build those relationships, the work of advancement to build the relationships, the faculty and support, all of that. I think what the structure of guided pathways and the things we're trying to do across college is to get those wheels to turn better together.
Director Baker?
Yeah, and if I could too, we get this thing, MATC in the news. Thank you, Tony. And I'd love to get it more often because we get it about every 2 months. I asked the president's office about this, and I don't want to be burdensome to anybody about it, but it also shows us places where we were on TV with our culinary program, and we were, on the front page of a section in the newspaper and the social media or whatever, with a number of our different programs. And I do think that creates buzz. This is the kind of media coverage we're getting, I think is is pretty phenomenal.
Sure.
And that it's not all just one thing, you know, like sometimes in the past, it's been like, okay, we just talk about welding like all the time. And like, not everybody wants to be a welder. And it,
Shocking.
I know, amazing.
I appreciate the opportunity, and just to respond briefly, so we typically do send that monthly. There was a little bit of a gap in coverage, and we've got options to share it more frequently, and we can have conversations about what the board's desire is and how to do that. We have systems that give real time or daily digests. We can curate it differently, so we've got options to consider for sharing that out. And as we bring on a new position in the public relations part of our team to refill a position where there was a retirement, we're going to be looking at the ability, just different ways to distribute those things digitally beyond our current work with social media, e-newsletter from the president. And so watch for that. And then we'd be happy to just get the temperature of the board on frequency and work with the president's office to make that happen.
Well, and just, it is absolutely one of the things we do as board members is also brag on the college. And, you know, in whatever circles that we're running in, to be able to tell some of those stories, I think is great.
Thank you.
Hi.
Yes,
According to Laura, the model that you talk about, that when usually the unemployment or the claims on unemployment are higher, that's when we see that uptick of going on our FTEs again. And then as probably like Director Foley said, that if the economy started to cooling off a little bit, we might see that probably that trend, or maybe we might be at the bottom of the trend of going down on FTEs, and maybe
Right.
hopefully.
I mean, it's not fun to hope for a bad economy.
Yeah, no,
But
of course not.
But at the same time, I think, and I'll come back up, switch. I think where we're well positioned, and what the drumbeat that I've been hitting is people are going to change their careers like 8 times in this time. And we need to position ourselves as the place for lifelong learning. And Dr. Martin talks about this all the time. And so when you're out there beating the drum of why, like we have so many people that return back for another degree, 5 years later, I really need to retool. And so our focus on like alumni relations and getting that piece is something we're trying to strengthen. So I think in this time, in this economy, we're well positioned. And hopefully that we can kind of not be so cyclical, but that we're always a partner. And so with our employers, we're trying to position ourselves that way. With the way we're active with our advisory committees, all of that is that we're kind of a place that people can come back to.
Yes.
So
Yeah, I'm just saying it because this is a concern. I mean, you see those FTEs going down, and all the other red flags go off, right? Or I mean, bells, right? They just go off. I'm like, oh, what are we gonna do? And talking about the budget here and all the numbers. I look at numbers every day. That's what I do. So when I see that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's when you really need to do something, or at least have. It's good to have to know that we are aware of this and we're gonna doing the right thing. And of course, as we ride the wave, right? We try to position ourselves on the best situation possible. So that's good to know.
I do have a question back to budget. I'm sorry. So right now we have a balanced budget, but you did state that you have not included any wage increases in there. So my question would be, if the goal is to have a balanced budget, and once you do get to that point when we're looking at wage increases, how do you anticipate getting to a balanced budget then?
Okay, well, we have had those conversations in the business office, and I know that Jeff Hollow has had those conversations with the cabinet. So one of the options, and we have a little room to claim additional, possibly claim some additional HERF funding to close that gap. We have several teams in the college that strategically are working to allocate, reallocate, reprioritize, release those funds as the COVID situation continues to change. So we have for her funding. As we continue to evaluate our staffing throughout the college, there is a possibility that we can increase our vacancy savings. We have 5 million factored in right now, and I was about to present that portion in the discussion about wages. And we always, our typical run rate for vacancy savings is about 3.5 million. But we do have open positions that total about 1.5 million, and we're being very strategic in how we hold those open positions, we have a very robust position prioritization process in which we're holding the positions, but we are determining that certain mission critical or essential positions do need to be filled, but we have a very robust process that we've been doing the entire fiscal year, given the financial uncertainty that we're experiencing. There's other conversations that they're probably too early to talk about, but there's other savings that we're working on. So we do have some ideas.
Okay, thanks. And because in 2 months we approve the public budget, right? So I'm just trying to get my timeline down there. And so just curious, because it is one of the roles that the board does have to approve as far as the public budget. And so trying to just make sure we have that. So I trust that you will get there, and I don't need all the details, but I just sort of wanted to bring that up since it is an asterisk, an important one on the budget.
I can focus a little bit on the expenditure side of the budget. So with regard to wages and fringe benefits, I know that everyone hears VP Jeff Hollow routinely point out that wages and fringe benefits comprise about 90% of our operating budget. And I just mentioned that in order to balance our FY23 forthcoming budget, we have factored in that position vacancy savings of 5 million. And again, as mentioned previously, the college is holding open vacant positions open and following that robust position prioritization process. So given existing vacancies and factoring in the time that it takes to fill positions along with this prioritization process, we feel that we are well positioned to meet this budget savings target for wages. With regard to fringe benefits, our budget has factored in an anticipated 9% renewal increase. The biggest piece of our fringe benefit budget is health insurance. But we are awaiting a final projected renewal rate from our healthcare consultants or administrators, which will be partially based on actual experience between now and the end of the calendar year. So the 9% is not absolutely firm. So this may slightly change our renewal increase. Of course, we're hoping that it ultimately goes down from 9%. And on the discretionary piece of the budget, this year, like no other year, we've engaged budget managers throughout the college to commit to savings on discretionary spend early on and throughout the course of the fiscal year. And I have to say that from my perspective, the collaboration and cooperation with this imperative has allowed us to bring down these costs. And it has been a challenge due to the pressures of inflation and due to the supply chain uncertainty, but we have brought down those numbers. So with that, the total expenditures reflect these items at this point. We do know it is a big asterisk not to have that potential wage increase factored in, but we feel very confident and we will meet our, fundamental budget objective, financial objective of balancing our budget. And I'd be happy to answer any additional questions regarding expenditures or anything else.
More questions?
You got any more statistics?
No, I
I'd like to do.
No, I don't.
Can I see regression analysis?
We could, that would be super fun. So, okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you again for everything you've done tonight in Jeff's absence.
My pleasure.
Next, Janice will share with us a review of the fiscal year 23 preliminary capital remodeling and renovation plan, which connects back to something earlier that we talked about this evening in the 10-year.
So here we are. Oh, push the button.
Maybe locked in.
So, hello again, and Ginny and I are here again to present on this, and I will turn it over to Ginny. But This again is just a kind of a continuation of our earlier conversation about how we do prioritize our construction recommendations. We have, as you know, many millions of infrastructure costs that are deferred, and we always try to balance those with new projects. So I'm going to let Ginny speak to what you have in front of you. And obviously it's a 3-year draft plan. It's always subject to change every year. And even during the course of the year, we make changes as well. So this is just for your, at this point, just for your information, and we will come back in May or June, I think, to get the final approvals.
Right, so this is your first look at the capital construction recommendations for next fiscal year. As Janice said, you'll vote on it in June. So there's an outline of the prioritization process. This is for the 1-year and the 3-year plans. So we came to you a little earlier this evening talking about the 10-year plan. The 1-year and 3-year plans are put together annually. It's a season of capital requests that we open up in November to budget managers in the college, and a series of prioritization rankings that are placed on all of the requests that we received. So we do have requests from previous years that remain on the list because the needs remain. We still have about 85.2 million that are represented on that list in requests and needs in the college. About 30.6 million of those are infrastructure needs that are on that list. This particular year, we did receive another 11.97 million in requests this year. So the ranking process is a transparent process where we apply a score essentially to each of the requests that are entered, and the facilities planning group is involved and engaged in evaluating the condition of the spaces that are requested for renovation. The strategic priorities of the college are part of that ranking process, and institutional research has a matrix and a process for ranking the programs and the academic requests that are put in as well. So scores are put together, and then a line drawn that would be a 3-year plan, and the President's Council looks at all of those projects that are within range of that line, and essentially puts together a 3-year plan. So you're looking at the 1-year plan for next year that had bubbled through those recommendations. Typically, we have a set of expenses in capital construction that we need every year. So the salaries for the team that work in facilities planning and construction are reflected in that list. And then also we have a higher than usual request for future project selection and refinement this year. The 18 million that we borrow every year, you all go through this process every month of 1.5 million being awarded and put out on the street for the next month for sale in those promissory notes. And that is the 18 million that we spend every year. We really want projects that are ready to construct with that funding that we are borrowing. So in order to get the designs and the construction documents underway and even the bidding in place so that we can award bids as soon as we borrow, essentially, we are asking for close to 1 million this year to be ready to go on 2 years of planning projects so that we're ready to construct when we borrow the funding. We do have about 5.1 million in essential infrastructure on the list this year. That includes life safety, so things like our heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and electrical deferred maintenance that Janice mentioned, as well as life safety, mass notification, access control. We're continuing through our fire protection program where we do not have sprinkled buildings. So next year we will be starting the main building, implementing sprinklering in this building. We always have an emergency and contingency fund. And then we do have some emergency concrete repairs that have shown up in lower seat parking that we need to tackle next year. So beyond that, we do have 11.265 million that are left on the list that nicely align with the facilities multi-year plan that we presented, the academic multi-year plan that was presented to you earlier this fall, and then the 3-year plan really built from these items that are ready to go first in the list from those plans. So we have a series of restroom improvements. We still have quite a few challenged restrooms in our district. So we have some funding in place to tackle 2 more sets of restrooms next year. We do have some specific, we're trying to be more transparent with the minor remodels that we do and more planned in our approach towards what we're remodeling for minors. So we have a small list of minor remodels that were ranked highest on the list. We do have a set of faculty office improvements at the Oak Creek campus that we'll be tackling next year from some very challenged spaces we have a lot of faculty in. A set of classroom improvements on the list. And then we are continuing through the student center, the S building multi-year plan 2 with some major renovations next to the 3rd floor. We've been doing the cafeteria kitchen this year. Next year, we will start on the student recreation lounge and a convenience store that will allow students to get food when the cafeteria is closed after hours. So it will extend the hours of being able to find food on campus besides a vending machine. We also will be moving into the 2nd floor in the Student Services Center with some remodels in the general advising, counseling, student resources, and student life areas. We are continuing with pathway office remodels at the Oak Creek campus and renovating their admission center along the new framework for serving students. We've talked about the heavy plate welding lab at Walker's. You may recall we shifted some funding that was in place last year for that lab and redirected it to other projects that were ready to go. So it is back on the list for next year. That is a lab that we are partnering with Komatsu for equipment on. And then we are building an outdoor restroom facility near the baseball field at Oak Creek, where there isn't one currently. We have teams arriving and changing in their cars, so this will be providing locker facilities for teams. And then we are building out a STEM center that is slated to be set for downtown and some associated relocations to get that positioned correctly. And then lastly, at Oak Creek, that was mentioned earlier this evening as well. We're applying for some additional federal funding, but we will be adding a dedicated truck driving track and range at the Oak Creek campus. So we did, as Janice mentioned, talk about the 3-year plan in additional projects. So you have a glimpse at what's coming in the next 3-year plan that we're required to give to the WTCS board every year.
Any questions?
Dr. Baker?
Yeah. You want to do something, Emily?
Director Wilson, did you have a question?
Yes. As your plans were going on about the restrooms, did we keep in mind when Dorothy Dean and her group came a few years ago and had major concerns about the disability restrooms for the disabled?
Yes, absolutely, Director Wilson. That is top of our list, the accessibility of the restrooms and making sure that the selections we are making fall in line with ADA requirements.
And we are adding.
Thank you.
But you have to do it anyway to get the permits from
Correct.
codes.
Correct.
I don't know if everything you had to do, I know, I can't remember, maybe that Attorney Falkenberg remembers, these were some specific things that this group that represents the disabled asked for. And I don't know, maybe they were something that you had to do. They may not have been. I just hope that we make sure that we do it, whether it's something you have to do, or if you don't, maybe we could consider it as we go along.
Right, so I think there's compliance and then there's going above the compliance requirements. And we are trying to go above those compliance requirements to ensure that we have accessible facilities. And we have a long ways to go with that because obviously we have a lot of old buildings with a lot of old design. And so as we design new spaces, we do need to make sure that we're keeping that in mind as well.
Okay. So 2 quick things. There in the 3-year, there's a couple of items that aren't assigned a dollar amount a year. So those are things that they're requested, but we just haven't put them someplace. Like the Oak Creek firing range extension and sustainability energy payback projects, those 2 things.
Yes, so the sustainability energy projects, we are on the list as a reminder that we have been using FCC reserve funds for sustainability projects.
okay.
So I don't want the board to lose sight that it is an important strategy and of importance to the college to be doing those sustainability improvements. So they are on the list. They will be provided funding, but not from this capital budget.
Okay.
And then the firing range, in light of the facilities multi-year plan and the future plans coming for a potential protective services building at Oak Creek, should we get to that stage, we have not yet in the 3-year plan funded that firing range with an eye on the future expansion.
Okay, and then my last question is, because I'm also looking at the 3-year, help me understand why we're constructing changing rooms for sports at like $3.6 million in the grand scheme of all of our needs.
I don't know if I can answer that.
Yeah, so those came up as priorities. Now, again, as we look at the future in year 2, that will need to be reassessed as we look at the prioritization in year 2. But we are committing to putting some restrooms and locker facility there because we just put a whole new baseball. The whole artificial turf.
Right.
We built a whole new
So
baseball
part of
facility there as well.
Sorry. Part of the complexity there too is that we do not have restrooms out there. So to add a building, it is the expense that you see reflected on the list. So it's either a yes, are we doing restrooms and lockers, and this is the price tag, or are we not providing these lockers and restrooms there? So that's part of the equation.
So this year, the 1.2 puts in the restrooms and the lockers.
Right. It is a growing building that is requested. What is going in this year is a 3-season facility with just two locker rooms for one team. So what is needed and what was expressed as a need and understood by the prioritization process was that multiple teams play at once on those fields. We have soccer fields, we have softball fields, we have baseball diamonds as well. So when we have multiple teams playing and multiple visiting teams as well, we need multiple locker rooms. So the next year is to add another set of locker rooms so that when two games are going at once, we've got places for those teams to change. And also to make it a 4-season facility in the second year. So it's not just 3-season.
I just wonder why that's so high on the priority list. If we're talking about needing to cut $3 million from the budget next year, maybe
This is a different part of the budget.
This is within the 18 million.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is the
that's in the
18 million.
capital.
We kind of need that to attract students that are interested in sports.
Yeah.
So it's.
I think the other thing is they were talking about the firefighters who come in and needing to use a truck driver training program, that there aren't facilities there. I mean, you really have to go quite a distance to get to those. And I think it was thought as a multi-purpose.
That is absolutely correct. Yeah, the protective services program. Yeah, they have no place to shower currently, and they're all geared up.
Full of
Smoke.
Just like, I was not feeling it, or like,
and
I'm like opposing teams who are coming to play. I'm just sort of, I'm not feeling that expense, but.
They can rough it, right?
Opposing teams don't need facilities.
Thank you. So I don't care.
Back to the priorities.
The reason for the 4-season is that protective services element, because they are the ones who have classes. Obviously, we're not playing baseball in the winter, but we do have classes in the fire town.
Thank you. I didn't need to put you on the spot. I appreciate it.
Any additional questions? Okay, thank you. Our last item under this section is the Student Holistic Health and Wellness Plan, which we did receive in advance, but Dr. Gonzalez.
Greetings. Hello, Madam Chair and members of the board. It is for me a pleasure to be able to speak with you about how a cross-functional team began to meet about 5-6 months ago. And one of the things that we wanted to address was the well-being, the health and well-being of our students outside the classroom. Many times I've heard today about the success rate, the persistence rate of the students that we serve. According to our research, we also know that if we don't meet the well-being and the health needs of our students, we won't be able to retain that. There are a lot of intersectionalities here that we need to be aware of. And one of the things that I'm glad to know is that because of the team that we had made about 5 to 6 months, we were able to create a health and wellness plan that it sets the stage as a framework for us to be able to serve our students. I have with me Ms. Josie Beal. She is going to talk to us about what is the framework right now that the plan is presenting to us as we attempt to serve our students for the next 4 years through this health and wellness plan. Dr. Beal, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Nadine. Thank you, board members. So we did present a video of our plan. We do have our committee members available to answer questions tonight. Traditionally, I'm presenting our COVID updates. However, with that same mindset, we understand that the pandemic magnified the health inequities that healthcare providers have known all along. As well, during the pandemic, everyone was forced to look at what is their current state of health and wellness. And so as a college, having the ability to offer our students a very strategic plan that identifies ways to address their health and wellness needs, not just medical needs, but a very umbrella approach to being able to prevent those obstacles that prevent them from coming to classes. Whether it is health literacy or being able to access resources right on campus versus going off campus for those resources became critical. Our plan does align with Transformation 2025, and that it specifically addresses our student experience, our equity of our students while they're on campus, organizational excellence and what we're able to offer our students, as well as community impact. And so understanding that our subcommittees that look at what could be offered to our students, we really wanted to have a phased approach, understanding we have some current existing services. We have some services that we would like to bring on campus, but really these services are sweat equity, meaning we reach out to our community partners, we look at grant funding opportunities, and then we have some components of our health plan that are very visionary and forward thinking, such as our health innovation plan. So under our subcommittees, we have our health innovation plan, which is spearheaded by our academic pathway, the healthcare pathway. We have integration of preventative health services and pandemic response. So how do you ensure students know what a current state of wellness may be? How do you help them navigate services, providers? Even we're housed within 2 large healthcare systems. We have Medical College and we also have Aurora Sinai. We also have the health department. So how do we leverage the resources we have to present those resources for our students to bring those services on campus? Pandemic responses, how do we stay in a steady state for any pandemic that may occur? And we also stay in a mobile state related to COVID. Our housing and food securities, we also address that. We understand the importance of, if I don't know how I'm going to provide food for myself or my family, then being able to attend to college becomes secondary. Or if I'm at school and I'm hungry, it's very difficult to focus. So the student experience and engagement was another subcommittee, and we looked at how do we ensure that our college campus is aware of resources and getting students into these services in a timely fashion. And then last is our community partnerships. So each of our subcommittees is inclusive of community partnerships that we have existing, but also opportunities where we can reach out and expand the services there. So I won't take much time to go through the plan because that was presented. We really want to have the opportunity to hear feedback and answer any questions. And again, Dean Burrows was the co-chair with us, as well as many of our subcommittee members, and they're virtually available. They're virtually online with us tonight. So with that, we're definitely open to any questions at this time.
Yes, Doctor, a question, and help me with my memory, was the fast finder part of your community part
is the FAST fund. Oh, the FAST fund. So yeah, so that's under, so yes, we do work with the FAST fund. We will continue to work with the FAST fund as ways to support students. That's one resource that is available to all college students, correct? We didn't specifically have as within our plan, but yes, it's a resource, an existing resource.
Thank you.
It is good to see you in person and talk about non-COVID items, so I appreciate that. And appreciate your reports throughout the last several months for sure.
Well, thank you so much,
Yeah.
everyone, for your time.
Thank you. All right. We've finished up that section and we are ready to, if there's any new business. We do have a couple items throughout the agenda up until this point that we've talked about that we will consider for the agenda and doing some follow-up on that we've already discussed, so. Then I will move on to the future events and announcements, and I believe everything there has been already announced, so I don't feel the need to necessarily do that. We have our graduation, the District Boards Association, the spring commencement, which is moved to Sunday, May 22nd, across the street, and then our next district board meeting is May 24th, that Tuesday, the week before Memorial Day. So after that, our next item is closed session. So do I have a motion?
I move that district board convene into closed session pursuant to section 19.851C and G of the Wisconsin statutes to discuss item 11A, personnel matters and legal advice. The board may reconvene into open session to take action on matters discussed in closed session under item 11A if necessary.
Second.
Thank you. So moved by Director Case and seconded by Director Foley to move into closed session. Can we please have a roll call vote?
Sure. Director Foley,
Aye.
Director Hamilton,
Aye.
Director Mendieta Ramos,
Aye.
Director Wilson,
Aye.
Director Baker,
Aye.
Director Case,
Aye.
Director Diaz,
Aye.
and Director Olson.
Aye. All right, we will move into closed session. Let's take a quick break if you want to quick grab some food.